I'm John Nixon from Eagle Lake Woodworking. Welcome to part 3 of the video series on how I built my pool table. This video focuses on the joinery method for the leg system. The joinery method is called Loose Tenon Joinery. And the way it works is there's a pair of mortises that match from piece to piece and a loose tenon that gets inserted into the mortise and joins the two pieces together. Now I know many woodworkers struggle to find a method to make mortises that they're comfortable with. I know I did. That's when I invented the motorized router lift that makes mortising on the router table possible. Let me show you how it works. Here's a close-up view of the lift in action. As you can see, the motorized router lift is attached to the router and moves up and down with the router. There's a pulse switch mounted on the router table, and there's a toggle switch that controls the direction of the lift. For hands-free operation during mortising, I've added a foot switch. It controls the operation of the lift from the floor. This allows me to keep both hands on the tenon jig and move the workpiece as it's being routed. This view from above shows how the tenon jig mounts onto the router table. It rides in the miter slot. There's two stops also in the miter slot that control the travel of the tenon jig back and forth. It's this amount of travel that will determine the length of the mortise. Let's take a look at this view from the plan that shows where the mortises will be located. We'll make a pair of mortises in each leg column and a pair of matching mortises in the end of each cross member. They'll be joined by loose tenons. The slats are joined to the cross members in a similar way. The slat and the cross member will have a matching mortise that receives a loose tenon. Before mortising the cross members, I cut them to length on the table saw. I'll square up one end, then install a stop block on the crosscut sled and cut the piece to length. I'll do the same operation for the straight and arched cross members. We're ready to cut some mortises on the end of the cross members. I lower the bit back down into the table, and I've set up the tenon jig to be the right distance away from the bit. The two stop blocks at the face of the tenon jig have been positioned to support the workpiece on either side. I clamp it in and begin the mortising operation. I'll move the tenon jig back and forth while bringing the router bit up into the work with the foot pedal. Mortise number 1 is done in the end of the cross member. We'll insert this same end back into the tenon jig, but with the opposite face against the tenon jig. This will create the second mortise in the same position as the first. We'll do the same for the arch cross members. The only difference is we've removed one of the stop blocks on the tenon jig face. We repeat this process until there's two mortises cut in the end of each cross member. Now it's time to make matching mortises in the leg column. We've installed stop blocks to control the distance of the travel of the workpiece. We don't use the tenon jig for this operation. The workpiece is too large. So we rely on the fence and these stop blocks to control the distance that the workpiece can move. The mortising operation is the same. I move the piece while bringing the router bit up into the work with the foot pedal. After making the first mortise, I'll move the fence an inch back and create the second mortise. To make the mortises for the lower cross member, I reposition the stop blocks. This view of the mortising operation from below the table shows how all the dust and chips is extracted out the bottom. Mortise number 1 is cut. I'll reposition the fence an inch away and cut mortise number 2. Now we have a matching pair of mortises that line up identically with the crossmember mortises. Here I am laying out for the mortises that will receive the vertical slats. This is more of a reference because after I install the stop blocks and the tenon jig, I just butt the piece up against the stop block and cut the mortise. There's my mark, and I've positioned the stop block and the tenon jig so that that mark is centered over the router bit. So with the workpiece butted up against the stop block, I make a 3/8 inch mortise. These smaller mortises are cut pretty quickly. They're about an inch deep. Having the stop block for reproducible cuts is really handy because now all I have to do is butt the end of the workpiece up against the stop block and make the rest of the cuts. The mortise position, depth, and size are identical every time. We need to make the matching mortise in the end of the vertical slat. We installed 2 stop blocks that allow us to position the vertical slat and support it during the mortising operation. I clamp in the workpiece and begin the mortising operation. You'll see how quickly this goes through MDF. With the stop blocks installed, it's really easy to cut these mortises identically and efficiently. I mortised all the vertical slats and the cross members in a matter of minutes. Making the tenons for Loose Tenon Joinery is really easy. I've thicknessed some stock and ripped it to the length and width of the mortise. Then on the router table, I'll round off all 4 sides using a 1/4 inch radius round over bit. Once we have the stock rounded on all 4 corners to match the shape of the mortise, we cut them to length on the table saw. I've set up my crosscut sled with a stop block to the right side of the blade so that each tenon is cut exactly the same size. To view the rest of the videos in this series and videos on other topics, visit EagleLakeWoodworking.com and click on the videos link. You can even sign up to be notified when new videos become available.